Get Back is the new Beatles documentary that was put out on Disney Plus and put together by Peter Jackson. If you don't know Peter Jackson, he did the Lord of the Rings movies. He directed them, and then he also um, he did the They Shall Not Grow Old documentary, which was about World War I. And he like remastered footage in 4K, high quality. Like it looked like a film that came out today, but it didn't. It was World War I footage. He did amazing work with that and restoration. And now we have this. Um, Now, if you're a Beatles fanatic like me, you're curious about this, I'm sure. But I think one thing you need to know when you're a Beatles fanatic is there is a lot of Beatles documentaries, and there's a lot of really good ones. One of my favorites being the George Harrison one that was directed by Martin Scorsese. I forget the name of that one, but yeah, there's a lot of great Beatles documentaries out there. There's hundreds of them because, well, these guys changed music history. They influenced pop culture to insane degrees that they literally revolutionized history. It's weird how this high school band that started singing "She Loves You," yeah, 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 went on to like literally change music history, right? But so you kind of, when you're going into a documentary like this, you want to know what's different. What does this documentary have to say that I can't get out of thousands of other documentaries? And I feel you on that because there's a lot of them. And I would say this documentary has a lot. What this documentary is about is basically that period where the Beatles were getting ready for their live performance on top of the famous rooftop. That famous rooftop performance, which was one of their last performances in person, because the Beatles were getting to a point where if they performed in person in front of a crowd, the people were screaming louder than the music, and no one could hear the music. They couldn't hear themselves sing. They didn't know what was happening. It was hard for them to play their instruments, and it just got to a point where they couldn't do it anymore. That's why the later years of Beatles albums were all albums where they were all recorded in a way where they could never perform them in concert. They were only able to be listened to on an album because they're so complex, and so many different instruments, and it's like impossible to ever recreate that in a concert format. It's very difficult. So that's what they did. And so this is that point where they're getting ready for that performance. And also it's getting closer to the band splitting apart, and they're also creating the album Let It Be and stuff, which, yeah, and so it's an interesting point in the Beatles' career as musicians and artists where they understand they're so influential, but they're also getting to a point where they're done. And I think you feel that throughout this documentary because while the band has chemistry and they're really together throughout this documentary, it really was like constant fighting, and you feel that in certain parts of this documentary, arguments, stuff that they probably would have never gotten arguments about 5-6 years before. They're now fighting about pretty heavily, and it gets to a point where they're just done, and they need to figure out what they're gonna do, and it's getting to that point. And I think that's what this documentary really shows off, the why the Beatles split up, because a lot of people want to have more Beatles music, especially people at the time. They wanted more. They didn't get enough. But I think that you see why this happened, and it was an inevitable. A lot of people blame Yoko Ono and all these different theories of why the Beatles broke up because there is no clear answer to why they broke up. Um, but you can see that no matter what it was an inevitability, and it was something that was gonna happen. And also, like, um, let's all be real, the Beatles had the perfect run of music. I think that when I talk about great musicians, I can't think of any other musicians out there besides like maybe Billy Joel and a few others where they just stopped at 12 albums. They were all great, and I can only think of one song on one of their albums that was objectively speaking bad. And that is I'm Looking Through You. That's the only song on Rubber Soul. That's the only song of theirs that I think is objectively bad. If you listen to that song, the clapping's offbeat. There's a lot of things wrong technically with that song that you can point out, right? But this, like, so that perfect run of music where that is possible is amazing, and I think we should all just cherish that. That we got that, because they could have put out another album and it could have been shit. We don't know, but it was a perfect run of music, and it was a perfect just kind of, I don't know how to explain it, but it's just like magical, As someone who didn't grow up in that time period with the Beatles, like in the '60s and stuff, it's like, to me, it's like myth and magic now, and it's like that's kind of something that like this documentary made me feel. I don't know. It's a really great documentary. It's incredibly well put together. Peter Jackson went through 56 hours unused footage. So think about that unused footage. That means that it wasn't used in any other documentaries. So there might be similar footage, but not the exact same footage. So there's a lot of footage here if you wondering what's different from others Beatles documentaries. Well, there's about 56 hours of unused footage. Tells you right there what we're dealing with here. Well, not exactly 56 hours within this documentary, but 56 hours of unused footage that he went through. This documentary, though, is over 6 hours long. It's split into 3 parts. Each part is about almost 3 hours. So I recommend watching it. It's incredible. And if you're a Beatles fanatic, you need to see this documentary. 10 out of 10.